Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Foster Files, a podcast about animal rescue and welfare. My name is Kelly, and every week I talk about issues surrounding animals in this country and to the people who are passionate about making their lives better. Today, I'm joined by Jesse Rothacker from Forgotten Friend Animal Sanctuary. Located in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Forgotten Friends takes a two-prong approach to better the lives of reptiles. They provide sanctuary and care for reptiles in need, and they perform educational events to inform people about how to properly care for these animals. Hi, Jesse. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Kelly, thanks for having us. It's nice to be here. We are live right on top of the reptile room at Forgotten Friend Reptile Sanctuary.
Oh, that's amazing. And if I'm being totally honest, I wish I could come visit because I think reptiles are so cool.
Yeah,
This
well,
is,
let us
this is
know.
incredible.
Yeah, when you're in the neighborhood, we'd be happy to give you a tour, and especially if you come in the
Yeah.
warmer months, then it's kinda nice 'cause in the colder months, in the Northeast here, reptiles need warm temperatures, so everyone is confined. If you can imagine about 100 reptiles confined to a smaller space, but if you come over the summer, well, then our big smelly tortoises, they're outdoors grazing grass. Our iguanas are out getting natural sunlight, our alligators and some of the other turtles and tortoises, they're all outdoors in the natural sunlight. And so then it's not all confined to just the reptile room, and it has more of a country feel to it.
That's awesome. That's so fun. So you kind of started already and it sounded like you have so many animals there. So tell me about the sanctuary. Tell me how you got started. Tell me all about the work that you're doing.
Well, in 2004, that's when we officially got started. But I guess to go to the very beginning, the story I usually tell at my show is that ever since I was little, I love reptiles. If I saw a lizard or turtle or snake in the wild, then I felt like I had to get closer to it. I may try to catch it. And, it's just that bond that you have that, I mean, you are just, some people are magnetized to reptiles. You just can't get enough of them. And so that's how I was growing up, back when kids used to read encyclopedias instead of iPads. We would check out the dinosaur section of the encyclopedias. And so I was just always drawn to them. And then eventually, as a teenager, I was able to convince my mother to let me have a pet snake. And then from having the one pet snake, it really just drew me into the greater reptile world. But before I got started in getting multiple reptiles, I realized there was another side of the reptile world, and that's so many people that bring them home as pets, bring them home when they're little, and many reptiles have large adult sizes, and many reptiles have very long adult lifespans, some of them longer than our lifespans. And so I had this idea, well, why would I go back to a pet store and buy a second reptile when I know that there's so many reptiles that people cannot keep, so many pet reptiles that they give up because they get too big or they live too long or whatever situations. And so instead of buying my second reptile, I called my local humane shelter that we have here in Lancaster County. And unfortunately, they said they didn't have any reptiles for adoption because, like most rescues, they're full of cats and dogs. So all of a sudden, as a young 20-year-old, I had this light bulb go off in my head that was, we need to have more reptile rescues. I'll just start one. And so in 2004, that's how Forgotten Friend Reptile Sanctuary began. It was just kind of a fun idea that when, I was very young, in my early 20s, not knowing how difficult it would be, not knowing, gosh, all the red tape, the paperwork, the tax statuses, like all the boring stuff that goes into animal rescue. I had no idea about any of that stuff. I just thought, well, this would be a really cool way that I could help reptiles. I could help people, and it would give me an opportunity to work with a lot of different reptile species and encounter a lot of different reptile species. So that's kind of gosh, it's turning into a long story, but that's a short story of how I started Forgotten Friend Reptile Sanctuary in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, almost 23 years ago.
I mean, that's an incredible story. I love just like the passion behind, I see this opportunity, I see this need to help these animals, and I'm just gonna go for it and see what happens. I love
That's
that.
Yeah, that's kind of my personality, is just being entrepreneurial and not being afraid to try things. And so, I did that, and thankfully I had a really supportive wife, because 2004 is the year that I started Forgotten Friend Reptile Sanctuary. It's also the year that I got married. So Thankfully, my wife, who's not even a huge reptile person, she, you know, we have dogs. She loves animals in general, but yeah, she just is a great supportive wife, and so she knew it was my passion and always supported me. And we've been able to raise our kids now that we got home from an educational show today, and both of my kids were in the reptile room helping to put away animals, how to helping to clean containers. So it's really become a passion for the whole family.
Why do you think you love reptiles so much? What is it about them that you think draws you in?
There's something very magical and mysterious about reptiles. I mean, I I love all of creation, and I love going out with other nature people. So like if I'm friends with birders, then I love going out because I don't know very much about birds. I may know more than the average person, but compared to a birder, I really don't know anything. And so I love going out with birders that they can just give me a huge education about the sounds I'm hearing or the habitat I'm seeing. And, in general, you just have these nature people that know so much. There's so much going on under the surface about these different animals. My friend Jason Gaiman, who he was one of the first people who ever introduced me to rattlesnakes and copperheads in the wild. And I remember we were on a hike and we walked through basically a big mud puddle that I never would have looked twice at. And he pointed down at the mud puddle and he said, "You see those? Those are bear tracks." And he said, "If those are the bear tracks, the cubs are probably right here." And he pointed around, he found the cub tracks. And just being able to see how much is going on right under our noses that we would never even see with nature in general, I think is so amazing. And then you get to reptiles, and I feel like with reptiles, they're still so much more mysterious than most animals. If you look at which animals receive the most, like the most scientific study and the most research, the most dollars that universities are pouring just looking at animals, it's mostly birds and mammals. And reptiles are these really cool animals that there's so much we don't know. I was out in the wild in Arizona some years ago with a researcher who was he was doing radio telemetry on Gila monsters, biggest lizards in the United States. These highly
Mhm.
venomous, really adorable orange black lizards. But he was telling us, like, well, we know where they go in the winter and we know when they come out. We don't really know what they do in there. And anyway, there's so many mysteries like that about reptiles where a little bit, but you're just scratching the surface. There's so much we don't know. I mean, gosh, they just draw you in. They're kind of addicting. They are really, really amazing creatures.
I feel like the mystery side of it, the reason that you love them is the same reason why so many people are turned off by them, right? Like
Yeah.
freak out with snakes and lizards and call them gross. And I think it's for that. A lot of it's for that same reason, don't you think?
It absolutely is. And so if we're doing a picture of a lizard, so like the lizard that I have in my pocket now, he's a monitor lizard, and monitor lizards look very snake-like. And so if I'm doing a photograph of Marvin, I want to make sure that I keep his hands out because if you could see his
Oh my
toes,
God, look at him.
as long as you see
And
his
he was just
toes,
hanging out in your pocket.
yeah, he goes in my pocket. So he's gonna end up, probably over 5 feet, potentially 7 feet long. He's one of the large
Really?
African monitors, yeah.
Wow.
So he's just, we've had him with us for, I think, 7 or 8 months now since his owner got sick and surrendered him to us, but he spends a lot of time in our pocket. He spent thousands of hours. I'm putting him back in my pocket right now. He spent thousands of hours in our pocket already because when he grows, from being this big to being potentially 7 feet long, we want him to be best friends with us. So we don't want him to
Yeah.
be afraid of us as he gets, large enough to be stealing crocodile eggs out of the wild and things like that. But
Wow.
anyway, what I was saying is when we are doing photographs of a lizard like Marvin, we want to make sure that you see his fingers because that humanizes them. When you're looking at
Mhm.
snakes, it's very hard for people to humanize them because they are just so different by definition. They don't have limbs. And so until people get to know them, they can be very scared by them or they know that thousands of people every year do die in the world by snake bites. And so we've got to find a way to help them understand, well, that, yeah, that is a way, that is a true concern. If you're in Africa, that's a true concern. If you're in Asia, that's a true concern, even to some extent, South America. But in the United States, largely snake bite deaths are not an everyday occurrence or an every week occurrence or every month occurrence. So it's not something that people need to be afraid of. So we try we try to meet people where they are with their feelings about reptiles and help them just to give reptiles a chance.
Well, it sounds like you're doing active work to do that. Tell us about the educational programs that you put on and the shows that you do in your community. I don't know if it's limited to Eastern Pennsylvania or if you have broader reach. Tell us all about it.
Well, this is how this started. When we started Forgotten Friend Reptile Sanctuary back in 2004, we were volunteering with like some youth groups and a couple community places like that. And so I remember asking Jim Horning, who runs this organization, Crossfire Youth Ministries, where we were volunteers. I said, "Hey Jim, is it okay if we bring a tortoise?" Because he knew that I did reptile stuff, but it was just starting. He's like, "Yeah, bring a tortoise. The kids will love it." And I remember Crossfire was meeting at this park by this fire hall, which is near Denver, Pennsylvania, for those people who know Lancaster County. And
Mhm.
so these kids are on one side of the playground, and I'm carrying this tortoise. I want to say probably 25, maybe 35-pound tortoise. And I'm just carrying this tortoise walking over to the playground. And suddenly, like the kids, if you've ever seen like a tsunami wave just come in from the ocean. That's what it was like. All the kids left the playground and just came running, like flocking to see this tortoise, and they were mesmerized. And over the coming weeks, I brought in a couple more animals, some snakes and some different things like that. And anyway, it was no, I mean, it was. I love obviously sharing them. I was voted class clown in high school, so I can't help but doing it with like a little bit of comedic flair. And I just saw that people love this so much. So suddenly I had the idea, well, I want to do more of this because I was really enjoying starting the reptile sanctuary. It's still completely a hobby at this point, not any aspirations of making it a career. And so I started the idea of I want to do more of these outreach programs because it went so well at Crossfire Youth Ministries, just doing it as a volunteer that we started having a couple more people call us because we had an article in the local paper about our reptile rescue. And I remember a local bookstore called us and they were having some sort of a Harry Potter event. And apparently there's a lot of snake stuff in Harry Potter. And so they
Mhm.
wanted us to bring snakes out for a Harry Potter event, which I thought, yeah, that's so cool that someone wants us to bring our snakes to a place. I mean, the only official detention I have on my record in high school is because I got in trouble for bringing snakes into a building. And now people are inviting me to bring snakes in the building. And
Mhm.
anyway, so I just thought that was so cool. So I was like quickly about to say yes. And the lady, I still remember being on the phone with her now that's like 20 some years later. I remember her saying, "How much do you charge?" And I had never even thought of that question, that people would pay us money to bring reptiles out and educate the public. And I remember in my head, I was thinking, say 50, say 50, say 50. And then real sheepishly, I was like, $25. And so then that was the first money that we ever got paid for doing educational programs, but it turned into something that, really kind of set up our whole business model where now we get to do this hundreds of times a year for schools and churches and libraries and camps and scouts and community events and corporate events, like everywhere you can think of, that we provide this educational entertainment where we get to do our mission of helping people to give reptiles a chance by giving them these fun, friendly encounters with reptiles that are not going to be fear factor based, that they're just really going to be educational and fun. But at the same time, they're actually paying us money to do this. And then that became a very important part of our business model that allows me to do the rescue full time. Is then now I get paid to do the programs. And then that allows me to volunteer my time to run the reptile rescue. And it all just came, I mean, it all just kind of grew organically. The whole idea of starting Forgotten Friend was just to start the rescue. And I didn't even know at the time that we could create these outreach programs that would be so desirable. People actually pay us money to do it. And, so it's just really wonderful that we here we have a program. People are giving us money to do what our educational mission is, to do what we'd want to do. What we started doing for free is now something that they pay us pretty good money to do full time. So it's really neat how that's working.
I mean, that's so great. Do you have specific, excuse me, do you have specific reptiles that you take that are like kind of crowd favorites?
Yeah, so we do, but to understand, Um, part of our lineup is we are often pulling from over 100 reptiles that may come to the program any given day, but we're probably featuring about 15. So that means the reptiles that I had out today at the juvenile detention center are going to be different than the reptiles that go out tomorrow to Lebanon Junior High School. So we will rotate our animals a lot. So like Marvin, who's in my pocket right now, he was at the program today, but he was not, I don't think he was at any of the programs last week. And so we do have kind of a lot of fan favorites, but depending where we're at, like if we're doing a larger stage show, I'm probably going to get one of my largest reticulated pythons that, it really could use 5 volunteers to stretch it out. And it's very impressive to look at if we're in a room, let's say with hundreds of seats in it. But it's that big of a snake that it's not an easy one for people to do hands on. So that giant snake doesn't come to every show, but we will have a big constrictor at every show. But like today, where we were at the juvenile detention center and we're doing programs for about maybe 10 or 15 teenagers at a time, we brought a large constrictor, but it was a 10-foot python, not like a 13 or 14-foot python. And what that allows us to do is then that 10-foot python, it's big and impressive, but it's small enough that we can stretch it out on a table that everyone can come up and pet the tail end. And we just manage the head end for an abundance of safety.
I remember when I was a kid, and I couldn't tell you how old I was, but we had like a reptile person come to the school that I was at, and he brought like an albino python, and
Yeah.
it was yellow.
Yeah.
And I just
That's what we had
remember,
today. Today we had our albino
yeah,
Burmese python out and it's memorable, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, I'm not even sure like if which school I was in, but it was so memorable because it was yellow, and like I remember being one of the few kids that wanted to touch it where I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's so cool. Because I know, a lot of kids are scared. Like my niece that I talk about all the time, who's 6 years old, there is no way she would touch a snake ever for any amount of money. It's just not happening. So
Well, it's
to
funny
each
that
kid their own, I guess.
a lot of people have that starting point, and we don't force anything. Like sometimes we'll have parents that are trying to force their kids to touch it, and we don't
Ah,
try
you
to
can't do
force
that.
anyone. That's not a good, yeah, it's not a good approach. We always
Mm.
we like to tell people when they act like they're so scared, we like to tell them, "Oh, it's your choice. You don't have to do it." And usually when we back away from forcing them, then suddenly they want to try it. But like with our big 10-foot python, our Burmese python, his name is Bruce, and we will stretch Bruce out on a table, usually like a 6 or 8 foot long table, and then that supports all of his weight. So instead of us breaking our back trying to hold him, or instead
Mhm.
of a bunch of people holding him for a long time that might actually be stressful on him, we just lay him out on a long flat table and that completely supports his weight. And then I just manage the head side just out of an abundance of safety, even though he's a big gentle giant. And then you can have elementary kids, even preschool kids, really kids and adults of all ages can walk by in a line and then they can pet him somewhere, usually from the middle down towards the tail. We always do just as educators to be extra safe. But then you get very, very few people that don't want to do it because then it doesn't seem like they're not needing to hold a snake around their neck or have this close encounter. They can walk by in a line with hundreds of people and they can just touch with one finger if they're really scared. And we'll see a lot of places we get 100% of the students and teachers will do it, or at least very high 95, 99% of these people will want to do it because we just make it a fun and safe encounter instead of having that fear factor feeling that a lot of people associate with reptiles.
Let's talk a little bit about the sanctuary side of things and the rescue side of things. How many animals do you currently have in your care?
So we usually have around 100 reptiles that are in our care, and
Wow.
we are some people worry about what a lot about what the terminology is of each rescue. And with us being called a sanctuary, I didn't even think of it at the time when we named it. But a lot of people think sanctuary means we're not a rescue, like we don't adopt out. Some people think sanctuary just means that's where animals go to live permanently. And we are actually kind of both. We are a sanctuary for most of our animals. So most of our animals out of those 100 reptiles that are with us, most of those are going to stay with us permanently. And so they do have a long-term sanctuary with us. Our longest tenured reptile is a ball python named Foosball, and she was 12 years old when we got her in 2004.
Oh,
So you could do the
wow.
advanced math. That means she's been with us into her mid-30s, which is very old for a snake. We have some reptiles that are much older. Some of our box turtles are much older. Now, they haven't been with us for over 20 years, but we have one box turtle named Red, and Red came to us from a teacher. She was a teacher in Philadelphia who got Red when she was in her early 20s, and she surrendered Red to our sanctuary. I want to say about 10 years ago when she was around 70 moving into a retirement home. So we think Red, not knowing how old he was when she first got him, but we think he's probably 75 or older. So a lot of
Wow.
reptiles will go and stay with us, but then we also have a handful of reptiles that are adoptable as well. So our number's always changing. Sometimes it's changing because, we have had animals, a lot of them for a long time that they do reach lifespan and they pass away. And then we also have new reptiles that are coming in, and then we have some that are adoptable, and then when we can, we try to work with other nature centers and other educators to get reptiles into other good places where they're going to have a good home, and especially if they can be educating. We had a middle school teacher who just adopted a corn snake in the last few weeks. We have a hognose snake that is supposed to go out to the Refreshing Mountain Wildlife Center. This is another nearby wildlife center that we try to connect with and collaborate with. So we always have our number kind of fluidly changing for one reason or another.
What what sort of things make you have you make the decision to keep an animal for life as opposed to adopting it out? Like, what are some of the things that go into that decision for you?
So, I mean, one of the main things is because education is such a big important part of what we do. If we know that we have a great spot for an animal in our educational program, then that gives us kind of an excuse to make a long-term home for it. I'm sure a lot of animal rescue people can relate that every animal you get in, you want to keep forever. And so it can be very hard to make that decision. My daughter, especially, she just turned 12, but she's usually the one who is the most upset when I tell her an animal's getting adopted out because we'll have animals that oftentimes they'll spend weeks or months with us, some of them even years, and when they
Mhm.
get adopted out, it is sort of like a part of your family is getting adopted out. So it is difficult, but you know, some of the animals we have right now that are adoptable are ball pythons, and we use a lot of ball pythons in our educational program, but we really have all of those spots full in our educational program. So some of those adoptable ball pythons need to go out. We have a black king snake right now, Mexican black king snake that is adoptable. And one of the reasons he's adoptable is we just don't have a spot for him in our educational program. We have a lot of king snakes that we use already. And so we're going to try to make him a good home. Other times we need to send them out because we can't provide the best setup for them as they grow. So a good example of that would be like the African sulcata tortoises, and we will usually keep them for a number of years, but we might keep them, let's say they come in and they're 5 or 10 pounds. We might keep them until they end up around 40 or 50 pounds or a little bit heavier. And then when they get to that weight, they're on their way to potentially 200 or more pounds. And as they get to those higher weights, they really benefit from living in warmer climates than we have in Pennsylvania. So when we get our giant tortoises, we're trying to get them down south or out west typically. So that way they can retire in a home where they can spend hopefully 12 months a year outdoors. Where we have them, we can get them outdoors. Well, like I had my tortoises outdoors. It's April, early April as we're recording this. So this is like the most frustrating time to be a tortoise owner, especially when they're really heavy, because you'll have them out for a day or two when you start getting temperatures in the 70s and above, and then it gets cold and you have to have them back in for a few days. And I mean, that doesn't sound like it's that hard if you have, a 2 or 3 pound tortoise. But when you're talking about some of these 30, 40, 50, 60 pound tortoises, taking them in and out is a real job. It's
Yeah.
stressful on the owner and it's stressful on the tortoise. So that would be
Mhm.
another reason we would sometimes need to find homes for some of our reptiles is they just need a warmer climate than Pennsylvania.
Do you have restrictions set by maybe the state of animals that you can't accept?
Yeah. So in Pennsylvania, I'll start by saying Pennsylvania is the wild, wild west for reptiles. Just a couple states around us, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Ohio, you cannot have most of the things there that you are allowed to have in Pennsylvania. So some examples would be like venomous crocodilians, large constrictors. The vast majority of states have heavy regulations about keeping a pet king cobra or black mamba or Nile crocodile. Most states, it's a big deal if you're going to have venomous or crocodilians. Pennsylvania has zero state regulations about venomous or crocodilians. Now, if you're in a bigger city, if you're in, Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or even some of the medium-sized cities, we're talking like Lancaster, Reading. You can probably think of some other ones like that that are that they're big enough that they have some municipal regulations probably on the books for things like venomous or crocodilians. But if your municipality doesn't have regulations about king cobras, the state of Pennsylvania doesn't have any. And most municipalities, they have regulations about how close your shed can be to the property line. They don't have
Right.
regulations about detailed exotic animal species. So we don't have a lot of restrictions on us from the state level and our municipal level. We live out in the country, so we don't have a very detailed exotic animal regulations in our municipality. So the main thing that we're governed by in terms of what we can and cannot keep is just native reptile species in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, for example, you can have a giant sulcata tortoise that gets a couple 100 pounds, but you cannot have an eastern box turtle, which stays in the palm of your hand because the box turtle is considered native wildlife here in Pennsylvania. So we have
Huh.
regs in Pennsylvania for native reptile species. We don't have regulations for exotic reptile species. So we have to
That
work
feels
through
like a
fish.
gap in legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, it's a can of worms, and I'm not a person who generally wants to see more and more regulations because I find that the legislators that pass the stuff, they are not usually experts when it comes down to species level regulations, and they tend to just paint regulations with a broad brush. So, I
Mhm.
would be for a long time, I've advocated that we need to stop the sale and purchase of alligators in Pennsylvania. It's an animal that could potentially grow over 1,000 pounds, and very, very few of them are ever kept humanely for their entire lifespan. Most people keep them for a couple years and get sick of them. A handful of people keep them for 10 or more years, but these are animals that could live 50 years or more, and they can get hundreds of pounds, and they need an aquatic setup. So it's just not something that 99% of people that buy them are gonna do correctly. So, for a long time, I've advocated for regulations about buying alligators in Pennsylvania, but we have not found any legislators that wanna step up to that challenge and do it. We had some legislators that acted like they were interested in doing it, but then they wanted to lump alligators in with a with hundreds of other reptile species and just do an outright ban on hundreds of species, and then that becomes its own problem. So it's very complicated how to regulate it correctly. It seems like in most examples of reptile regulation throughout the country, states have either done too little or too much. And it's hard to find that happy medium where, you are allowed to have your bearded dragon if you keep it correctly, according to the letter of the law, but you're not allowed to have something that is, a Nile crocodile or a black mamba or something that is very much at the advanced level and in some cases becomes a threat to your neighbors.
You sent me over um, some surrender requests, and it was so interesting because you sent them to me about a week or so ago, I think. And there were dozens of requests in there, and just like one or two sentences of, I can't care for this animal anymore, or my family member had this animal, or whatever, can you take it? Can you take it? And I think you told me that was just like maybe a week or two of
Yeah,
requests that you had?
Yeah, I was trying to think of, okay, what are some good representative requests to share with you that would kind of paint the daily picture of what calls we're getting. And what I did was I just
Right.
went back through my email and I just scrolled back through my email and I don't think I went back more than 2 or 3 weeks. And like you said, I mean, dozens of requests and just every story that you could think of, every reason you could think of. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard because you wanna say yes to all of them, but we cannot say yes to most of them. Most of them will try to help network a home, and a few of them we're able to say yes to take in directly, but there are so many people that need help with their reptiles out there for so many reasons.
So I hesitate to ask why that is, and the only reason I say that is because I wonder if you're getting so many just because there are so few reptile sanctuaries, because, like, we see this all the time with obviously cats, dogs, birds. I mean, I spoke to an equine sanctuary. Like, it happens kind of across the board. Do you think that it's more intense with reptiles, or do you think it's like what I'm thinking, that you're like kind of the one resource people can find in your
So
area?
I think it's both. I think you're correct that there are not reptile rescues in every county. Like you could expect most counties are going to have an animal rescue for cats and dogs at the very least.
Yeah.
But when you go county to county, you're not going to find a reliable reptile rescue. And then for us, being in our 23rd year, even though we're small, our name has gotten around a lot over the last couple decades. So I think we are well known, and forgottenfriend.org has been on the internet for a long time. So people are finding our website. And I think we're just on a lot of lists for, a lot of police agencies or a lot of zoos or a lot of people are recommending us. So some of it is that we're just getting recommended because there are not a ton of great reptile rescues with long track records. But I think the other side of it is if you are, let's say you were thinking about getting a dog next week, you would decide, well, can I get a Great Dane? No, I live in an apartment. I can't get a Great Dane. I can't get a Saint Bernard. I need to get something that fits that environment because in 6 months it is going to be full size or nearly full size in the first year or so. But then when you look at reptiles and amphibians, many of those things are taking years to get full size. So if you're thinking, like we hear this story all the time, you take something like a boa constrictor or a python or an anaconda, a monitor lizard, some of these large growing things, sulcata tortoises, iguanas, people are getting them when they fit in the palm of your hand. And then a year later, they may have doubled or tripled in size, but they are not gigantic yet. So, like, let's just say we'll take the example of an alligator. If they're going to grow a foot a year for the first 5 years, well, after 2 years, the thing is only 2 feet long. It's nowhere near 1,000 pounds. And so people have this misconception with large reptiles that they go, oh, I'm going to get it as a hatchling. And I have this master plan that I don't really need to make reality for a long time. So I'm going to get this alligator hatchling that fits in the palm of my hand. It looks like a gecko right now. I have it in this cute little 40-gallon tank, but in 5 years and 10 years, I'm gonna build this giant pond in my backyard, and I'm gonna, they have this master plan of how in 5 or 10 years in the future, they're gonna have this amazing immaculate setup because in that point, they're gonna move out of their mom's basement, or they're gonna have more money, or they're gonna, have all these resources. In reality, what happens is in 5 or 10 years, well, you're not single in your mom's basement anymore. Now you are like engaged or you're married with kids. And this giant reptile that you thought was so fun when you picked it up when you were 17 years old, well, now you're 25 and it's the last thing you care about. And you just, need to move it out of your life. I mean, our big Burmese python, Bruce, that we had out today, um, a good example. And he came from a very good home and a very caring home. I mean, I could tell you how nice the setup was and how elaborate the house was that he was at. But they had him for 7 years, this really nice big, I almost want to call it a mansion outside of Philadelphia, and they took great care of it. But after having him for 7 years and doing everything right, they started having their own human babies. And so suddenly having a 10-foot python when you're having a human infant in the home is not a good combination. So I think a lot of folks, it's just their their realities, their human realities and their human needs change a lot over the years as these animals grow. And so, sadly, it's just it's not the same as, I don't know, your cats or your dogs are kind of within a year reaching that adult size. And so I think you're thinking more about what your reality is for those cats and dogs more than you are an animal that's going to take 10 or 20 years to reach lifespan or to reach adult
Well, I was
size.
gonna say, like, even with the lifespan of it too. Like I had this conversation with Soaring Spirit Sanctuary, and she's like, parrots can live to be 100 years old. So you
Right.
get this bird and you're, well intentioned, and then now all of a sudden you're 50 or 60 years old and your needs in your life have changed so much um that you can't continue to care for it. And that's not the I mean, we wish that were the case with cats and dogs, but it's
Yeah.
really not. If you get 15 years out of your dog, that's lucky, that's a blessing,
Right.
whereas it sounds like for these reptiles, their life is just really getting started.
For many reptile species, you're talking it could be 20, 30, 50, 100. I think the record on tortoises is over 200 years. And I don't think there's enough
Wow.
kale in the whole entire world that I could eat to ever live to be 200 years old. I'm hoping not to live to be 100 years old. Gosh. But these
I know.
reptiles, they really just keep going, and so it is difficult, and, with the last snake that we took in was a giant rat snake, and he came from one of the best homes that I know of. It's a really great nature expert who raised him for 12 years. They believe this rat snake was 2 when they got him, so that makes that rat snake 14, but the owner now is in his 70s, and he's downsizing into a smaller place, and he just doesn't have space for a 7-foot rat snake anymore. So that's,
Wow.
you look at that though, that's an animal that you had for 12 or 14 years. And if it was a cat or a dog, they probably would just keep it until its life is over. But with a rat snake, it might live another 12 or 14 years.
Wow. Wow. So is that I like to ask people when especially when they're in animal rescue, what is something that you wish the general public knew? I mean, I'm sure you have a handful of things that at every single event you get this particular point across, or at least you try to. What is that for you?
Well, I mean, I guess we approach 2 different things. So we approach the animal rescue educational side, and then we approach the wildlife educational side. So when I'll just answer the animal rescue side for now, but it's the cost of that animal that you see, the price tag on the animal in the pet store is not the cost of taking care of it. And so you might see, let's just say you see a gecko that's 10 or $20 in the pet store and you think, "Oh man, well, I have $20. That thing, and it doesn't need all the things that cats and dogs need, but in many cases the expenses are even more for reptiles because you have to create their whole environment because they're cold-blooded. So that could mean that you need to get them heat lamps and heat pads, and not just heat lights, but they have these special lights that give them synthetic sunlight called UVB lights. And those are really important, or they're going to get a twisted skeleton. I mean, they need them to metabolize vitamin D the same way that we do from real sunlight. And a lot of reptiles need that. Iguanas, bearded dragons, turtles, tortoises. A lot of those reptiles need the UVB. So all of a sudden, like, we're not even talking habitat yet, but we're talking about like two or three potentially different kinds of light bulbs that all can be very expensive. They all need to get changed regularly. And then you got to figure out the bedding, which is different for every species. You got to figure out how to keep it humid, which could be as simple as just spraying it down with a spray bottle like you would use to iron your shirts, or it could be something more like a fogging or misting system that's more elaborate. So you have to have all of those things. Otherwise, they're not shedding correctly with heat and humidity. And then, of course, you got to figure out how they're eating. And then before long, some of the times you're growing your food for your reptiles. Like, it's not that unusual if you have lizards that you might have your own cockroach colony. And suddenly, you have another job taking care of your pet's food. We had friends that lived down in Florida, and when we're visiting down there, they're trying to get us to take some cockroaches home because they had this neat setup to breed dubia cockroaches, which are a really great feeder roach. But the funny part of their story is they had this nice colony of cockroaches that they started to feed their bearded dragons, but they didn't have bearded dragons for like a couple years. And they're like, now we just have cockroaches. And so they're trying to get us to take their cockroaches.
So like it's weird meeting new people. This is a whole conversation.
It is. Yes. It's
That's funny.
And it's funny what, those things that would seem really weird, I'm sure to their family members that are not reptile people, to their friends who are reptile people, were like, "Oh yeah, well of course you have a cockroach colony." Because people who know, they know, like, well, yeah, there's some roaches that are a pain that you don't want. They're climbers, they escape. That they're not the kind you want. But like dubia roaches, people really love because they don't climb like most roaches climb. They get to the perfect size that they feed a gecko or they feed something bigger like a bearded dragon or even a monitor lizard. And then if you ever remember the end of Back to the Future or Back to the Future 2, where they are able to power able to power the time machine by like putting banana peels and stuff in it. I don't know if you remember that part of the
Mhm.
movie. Well, that's basically how you power cockroaches is you just take like apple cores and banana peels and, stuff that you would compost, and you give it to them and then they turn it into protein. So, I mean, it is a pretty neat invention that those little roaches turn your compost into protein for your lizards.
So the moral of that story I hear and that point I think I'm hearing is don't impulse buy a reptile
Yes,
just
that's
because
it.
it seems like less care than a mammal. Is that fair to say?
No, that's a way better way of saying it. I trail off a lot. I have ADHD, but
No,
that's a
it's
way better way.
okay. No, I like it. I think it's so I I think it's great. I don't think we wanna necessarily oversimplify what you're trying to say. I mean, like, I never I it's great that you brought up a cockroach farm because never in a million years would I have thought that if I gave my nephew a bearded dragon, I would think that that could lead to him then needing a cockroach farm because
Right.
that's grounds for my sister to disown me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, like, I'm not
Oh
trying
yeah.
to
It
get to
sounds
that
so
point in
funny.
our relationship.
And it's so funny because, you'll start like crickets and superworms. They're sort of like the gateway drug, but like the gateway bug. And so you'll get crickets as a gateway bug. And then after a year of having to run to the pet store every week, you'll be like, well, maybe a Rubbermaid tub full of roaches isn't that bad if I don't have to leave the house every week. And so it starts seeming more and more convenient as you go. But really, that is the truth of it is, we tell people to consider the full price when you see a reptile. And so there are different stores, like that fish place in Lancaster is one that does a lot of adoption events. And I really appreciate that fish place in Lancaster because you can go in there and they're not just selling you the animal and wishing you luck. They're going to sell you the animal, but they will take you out in the aisle and they're going to show you everything you need. And they have a lot of setups that are already made ahead of time. So you might look at that animal that maybe it's only $20, way less than a cat or a dog. But then you'll find the starter setup is hundreds of dollars. And then if you want to get elaborate, you could spend thousands of dollars. And that's what people need to understand. And it really is an investment to take care of your reptiles properly. And not everything has to be set up fancy, but there are some things that truly are important, getting your heat and your humidity and your UVB light and all of those things. The hide boxes, reptiles get stressed out if they don't have hiding stuff. So there's all those things that you need to provide for your reptile to help them thrive.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up that fish place because I want to do our foster spotlight. And we're going to have a unique foster spotlight today because Jesse's going to go off camera for a minute and he's going to go grab us a ball python that is available for adoption and is likely going to be at the adoption event at that place coming up. So why don't you go grab your buddy and we'll wait and then we'll talk all about the python and we'll talk all about the event you have coming up.
All right, I will be right back.
Awesome. All right. So now in front of us, for those following along on YouTube, we have a ball python. Does this guy have a name?
Yeah, so I actually brought two of our adoptable
I
ball
was going to say,
pythons.
okay, yeah, I see two different colors there.
Yeah, this is
Who's
Loki.
that?
This is
Oh,
Loki, and
amazing.
so Loki, I'll just put him around my neck for ease of handling. He came from a home in a sad story in the Harrisburg area, and then
Mm.
here I have Nanners, and Nanners came from
Oh,
a home, I believe, in the York area, and so they both
okay.
had different stories. When we get calls to take in reptiles, it's like I said, we want to say yes to all of them. We have to say no to most of them because we need to make sure that we have space and we have ability when we get the real emergency calls. And so, like in the case of Loki here, Loki's owner had tragically passed away unexpectedly. And so, um, when his family called, they were calling saying, "We don't know what to do with our son's snake who unexpectedly passed away." And so in that case, we have an animal like this who, he's not receiving care, or if the family's trying to care for him, they're doing their best, but they may not know what, what a they may not know how to do everything the way the owner had done it right. And so we're able to help the snake in that way receive immediate care. They may not even have the food to give them. They may not know how to feed them. A lot of times people just don't know that the same way you kind of intuitively can figure out how to feed a cat or a dog. Every reptile is so different. As we talked about, some of them have cockroach farms. So
Yeah.
um, when it comes to these, we always have about 1,000 frozen icicles in our freezer, so we always have plenty of food for our reptiles. In that case, we're able to go and help the animal, but more importantly, in some cases, we're able to be a resource for the family because you can only imagine if you just unexpectedly lost a family member how much of a need that is that we're able to meet just doing a simple thing, taking care of one more animal on top of the 100 that we have. But we're meeting a huge need for that family in their time of need. So it's a neat way that we can be there for the animals and then also be there to serve our community and, to show love to the people in the time that they truly need it. So anyway, so that's Loki. So that's his sad situation that he's from. He needs a new home. And then Nanners here actually came from another home. And Nanners was one of three snakes that actually came in from the same home where they were dealing with changing life situations and just were not able to maintain the number of pets that they had. So Nanners and Loki currently, they are planning to be at the adoption event April 18th at that fish place, that pet place. And we're only one we're one rescue that's going to be there, but usually at their adoption events, they have a bunch of different rescues. So it's a great day to come out. And if you like, maybe you're not in a place where you're ready to adopt a pet at all, well, just come out there and meet some other reptile rescues. Maybe you'll find, maybe reptiles aren't even your thing, but maybe you'll find a greyhound rescue or a bird rescue. And, maybe you'll just find an organization where you get to connect and volunteer or learn. But anyway, that's one of the places that we like to do some events when we can is at that fish place in Lancaster.
So you said that that event is on April 18th, and what
Yeah,
time is that event?
I think it's 11 to 3. Let me let me
Okay,
just double check, make sure I'm giving you the right
sure.
time. But I believe
Yeah,
it's
no problem.
let's
While
see, we
you're
have it
looking
on.
that up, I will remind listeners that I will be putting the adoption page of Forgotten Friends in the show notes. I'll also find the event at that fish place and I will put that in the show notes so that if you are interested and you're in the Eastern PA area and you want to stop by, you can meet Jesse, you can meet Nanners and Loki. And I gotta say, Loki obviously is a cool looking snake, but Nanners is gorgeous. She's like
Mhm.
pale yellow and she's really beautiful.
Yeah, with ball pythons, for those of you guys who aren't listening, it almost looks like, if you took a photograph and you had the full colors on one and just the negative, colors on the other ones. That's how these ball
Yeah,
pythons look. It's just one of them has
yeah.
the natural coloring you would find if you pulled them out of
Yeah.
a burrow in Africa. In one of them, it looks like they just ran short on that black melanin pigment that gives them the darker coloration. It's just a very, very pretty yellows on there. But lots of different ball python patterns are now available in the pet trade. And that's one of the reasons they become so popular. Besides the fact they really are, I mean, look at just how low key, if you guys can watch the video, they are
Yeah.
just super mellow. They're
For
just kind of
everybody
chilling.
listening, Jesse is very easily and comfortably handling both of these snakes. I mean, they're both kind of moving around almost because they seem like they're curious and they want to go. But I mean, he's got them near his head, near his face, around his arms, and they're next to each other. And they're just seem so chill and, like I said, curious, but, just hanging out. And then
Yeah, they're
he's going
just
to pull
all
out his monitor lizard again.
yeah, Marvin was still in my pocket the whole time. He doesn't even mind that we have all of these snakes up here, but, I'm gonna put
That's
him back in my
amazing.
pocket. Yeah, that's just
So if someone is considering adopting a ball python, what are some of the big considerations that they should think about when they're taking that decision into account?
well, you need to figure out if you're comfortable with the feeding regimen. Now, when parents come up to me and they ask what pet they should get for their kids, I will tell them to get a snake. And most people have a snake phobia or they're afraid of feeding them. They think you've got to feed them live animals. You don't. So just make sure you're comfortable with the feeding regimen. So what we feed almost all of our snakes is frozen icicles. So when we do a feeding, we thaw out about it would be about 75 to 100 frozen icicles and maybe about 10
Oh,
frozen
wow.
rats. And so all of these guys, they easily take frozen. You don't need to do live. So it's a lot easier. A lot of people say it's more humane, it's more cost effective, it's cleaner. It's very easy. And then, you can just have a year supply of frozen icicles in your freezer and in a freezer bag. So makes it very easy versus having to, go out to the pet store to get crickets for a bearded dragon every week. But
I know.
that's the efficient way to do it. And then besides that, if you're thinking of a ball python, make sure you understand which python species you're getting. A ball python is going to stay probably 3 or 4 feet its entire life. And if you get a Burmese python or reticulated python, it could be 10 or 20 feet long. It's quite a difference.
Wow.
So if the word python is in the name, make sure it's a ball python. Make sure you do your research that you know you're getting the one that's not going to outgrow its welcome in a few years.
What kind of life expectancy do ball pythons have?
So I would expect probably 15 or 20, but foosball, our oldest ball python, we think's about 36 this year. So
Oh,
you'll see some of
wow.
these guys are going into the 30s. Now that's very old. We're surprised that foosball lives that long. But I mean, not only is she living that long, she still lays eggs almost every year. So she is just like a very
Wow.
healthy, active female, well into her 30s. And that seems old for some boas and pythons, but it's not unheard of. So most snakes, if you're looking at like a small or medium sized snake, like a ball python or a corn snake or a milk snake or a king snake or a hognose snake, a lot of those are kind of that small to medium size. You're going to be looking at a tank that's probably minimum 20 gallons, probably 40 or 50 gallons is what you want to prepare for. And for most of these snakes, you just need to have a hot side and a cool side. So you don't need to, I won't bore you with the exact details because you could Google care sheets for every species. But generally, with reptiles, you want to have a warm side and a cool side. So if it feels too warm, they can go to the cool side. If they feel too cold, they can go heat up in the warm side. And that's just, it's a basic thing called thermoregulation where they want to regulate their own body temperature. It's just part of any reptile's life cycle is being able to thermoregulate from hot side to cool side.
I'm going to ask a really uneducated question, but you brought up that you have a female that lays eggs. And I'm
Yes.
just wondering, does she just do that as part of her cycle? And then as long as you don't have a male in there, you don't risk like that fertilization and then having more
Right.
snakes than you intend to have, right? Is that
Yeah.
how that works for you guys?
That's very typical. So in the same way,
Okay.
like if you have a hen in your backyard, she will, when she's ready to lay eggs, she will usually lay about 1 egg a day, whether or not there's a rooster. So it's kind of that same idea for reptiles. The timing is different. Like one of our bearded dragons, we have 2 female bearded dragons. We have no males. One of our females just laid 27 eggs. Now, those
Oh,
27
wow.
eggs are not fertile. They won't hatch. They won't turn into anything, but even with the absence of a male, it's typical that a female may lay eggs every year, sometimes every 2 or 3 years, some of them multiple times a year, just depending on the situation. And then if you throw a male into the mix, then that doesn't mean the eggs are going to be fertile. There's a couple additional things you have to do for the eggs to still be fertile and have successful breeding, and that gets different for every different species out there. But some of them breed very easily, some of them don't. And, for honestly, for some of ours, even if we don't expect to have fertile eggs, we oftentimes will let the males and females get together in the spring just because when they in the wild, the way they find each other is through pheromones. They can smell essentially like the perfumes that the females are putting off. And so sometimes when we have males and females in the same reptile room, they will not eat very well in the spring if they can smell one another, but they cannot see one another. So sometimes we'll actually let ours spend some time together and let them go through their spring rituals. And even if they're not doing all the things that'll give them fertile eggs, sometimes that just becomes part of their spring ritual that they want to wake up. If they can smell the female, they need to get together, spend some time together. And I mean, it is just wild how they're hardwired to do this, to know all of this. So, like our king snakes, which normally eat one another, king snakes eat other snakes. But during our last feeding that we did, our April feeding, which is getting to be springtime, that's when reptiles they have love and all that stuff on their mind. And some of our king snakes would not eat, and so we let the males and the females be together, and in almost no time flat, we have to keep a close eye on them because they do potentially eat one another, but in almost no time flat, they had their tails wrapped up. They were doing the courtship thing that snakes do, and they and then once they have that out of their system, then they go back to eating better. So these are just like the fascinating things about reptiles that you're like,
Yeah.
how did they learn? I mean, if they were hatched in captivity, how did they learn that that pheromone means they need to meet a female? It's an invisible
That's
smell
so
that we can't
interesting.
even smell, but they can sense it. And anyway, it's these things just like I was saying, the things about reptiles that kind of amaze us, that make us want to learn more. It's all of these things that all you can do is speculate on some of the things through a lifetime of observations. But it's like what things that you think you know, and then you learn something else. Oh, I got to tell you my one alligator story. Speaking of that, so
Go for it.
we had speaking of animals that eat each other, big alligators will eat little alligators. And one year we
Mhm.
had 6 really little alligators, and then we got 1 big one. Now, the little ones I want to say were like maybe 10 inches. The big one I want to say was maybe 2 feet or bigger. So he's big enough that it would not have been safe to house them together because he could potentially harm the little ones. Well, we had them in the same outdoor building, but the big one was in one stock tank and the little ones were all in a different stock tank. And every time we came out to the building, we found the big one had climbed out of his stock tank and he would be down on the ground. We'd have to put him back into his own stock tank. Well, one day we came in there and he was not in his stock tank. And somehow he had figured out how to climb into the other tank with all the little alligators. And this is what we were trying to prevent because he was at the size that he was big enough to hurt all those little alligators. Well, when he was in there, he was not hurting them. He was just hanging out. They were basking together and doing normal reptile stuff as if they were all buddies. And we decided as long as he wasn't showing aggression, we were going to let him cohabitate with the little ones, kind of go against, you sort of have these rules that, that you're supposed to follow. But then sometimes in situations you realize, well, it doesn't seem the rule doesn't seem to apply here. And so we let him stay in there. And when we let him stay in there, do you know what he never did ever after that? He
What
never tried to climb,
escaped?
never tried to escape. So he never tried
Wow.
to
So that's
climb
all
out
he
of
was
it.
trying to do was get to buddies.
That's what was happening. And one of the differences between alligators and other reptiles is that alligators and crocodiles actually vocally speak to one another. So they vocalize and chirp and call. And so what we speculate is that this big alligator was stuck in solitary confinement, living by himself. And again, the general rule is that reptiles prefer to be solitary animals. That's the general rule. But if you learn more in depth, you realize there's more than that under the surface, that there is a lot of social structure for reptiles. And so we speculate that he was in his own tank by himself and he was hearing the other five or six constantly chirping and talking to one another. And the only thing he wanted to do in life was to get out of his tank and to find the other alligators that were there talking. And once he found a way to get in there, he never showed aggression towards them, and he never tried to leave that second stock tank as long as he got to be with them. And so all these people that are out there saying we know reptiles are this, we know reptiles are that, we know that they're just these cold-blooded, solitary, heartless animals. Well, I would challenge that, and a lot of people would challenge that and say, no, there's more beneath the surface that you just have not discovered yet. And those are the types of stories that just, I think, will make me fascinated for a lifetime with these animals.
I mean, you really have a gift because you just warmed my heart about an alligator. I mean, that's really that's impressive.
There are stories,
Not
and
that
I
I
mean,
ever had. Oh,
but there's
sorry, go ahead.
there's just stories upon stories like that, and
I
I
know,
do
that's
trail off, but I
amazing.
mean, I just have now decades of these experiences of animals amazing me and people amazing me and being able to help people, and I mean, just so many wild stories I could tell you, but yeah, I would just tell everyone, if you are not sure about reptiles yet, our motto is give reptiles a chance. So I would encourage people to give reptiles a chance, to know there is more beneath the surface than maybe you have learned. And if you have learned a few things in your life that could possibly be incorrect, and I'm sure we could all sit around and think of some things. When I was in school,
Right.
Pluto was still a planet. Now we have learned Pluto is not a planet. There are, plenty of examples. So if there are a couple things in your life you've ever thought you knew, and then you later learned there was more than what you thought you knew, I would tell you to give reptiles a chance and tell you there is a lot more about reptiles that you may have thought you knew. And there's just more that you have yet to discover.
Well, if you are in the Pennsylvania area and you are interested in inviting Jesse to come and do one of his outreach, educational, and informative programs, you can find him at forgottenfriend.org. I will, of course, be linking the website and the event that they're going to on the 18th at that fish place on in the show notes. He has links in there for his Facebook page. He's got his reptiles for adoption available. So all the information could be found at forgottenfriend.org. But Jesse, I can't thank you enough, not only for the incredible work that you're doing, for the educational outreach that you're doing, but for the work that you're doing for animals, but for coming on the podcast today and showing us the monitor lizard and showing us manners and Loki and just introducing us to this whole different side of reptiles that probably so many people, as you know, just need to learn about. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, well, thanks so much, Kelly. Thanks for giving reptiles a chance. We hope to see everyone else out there. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure to go over to Forgotten Friend Reptile TV. That's our YouTube channel, Forgotten Friend Reptile TV. So give us some likes and comments and all of that stuff. And I think we have a couple, 300 videos on there, almost all featuring
Nice.
reptiles and amphibians. So that's a great place to start. And some of these stories that I tell on the podcast, sometimes people wonder if I'm making them up. Half of them have a YouTube video to go behind them, so you can find them on Forgotten
That's
Friend
awesome.
Reptile TV.
I will link your YouTube channel in the show notes as well. But just as a reminder, you can follow the podcast on YouTube at the Foster Files Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Foster Files Podcast. And if there is somebody that you think that I should be talking to, like Jesse, please send me an email at the Foster Files Podcast at gmail.com. And Jesse, thank you so much for your time today. And I just remind everybody as you're listening, make sure to be kind to yourself and be kind to animals. Have a great day.